All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So let's settle in, get comfortable, and get back to the book, shall we? Welcome back. This is our continued reading. I've lost count. I'm sure it's in the... Are we at 10 now? Anyway, the Three Musketeers. We are well over halfway at this point, and things are getting interesting. We've seen the quartet assemble their kit with a little bit of providence on their side. So they are well armed and well equipped and ready for the military campaign that is to come. And there seems to be some intrigue behind the scenes that we'll see whether or not anyone can expect it or anyone is prepared for it. We saw the Cardinal make his move and try and recruit D'Artagnan, try and twist his way into a favorable position. We are in agreement that the Cardinal is one of the best villains in literature. And we'll see what other sorts of plots he can string together. So, let's go ahead and continue this evening with the Three Musketeers, starting from chapter 41, The Siege of La Rochelle. The Siege of La Rochelle was one of the great political events of the reign of Louis XIII, and one of the great military enterprises of the Cardinal. It is then interesting, and even necessary, that we should say a few words about it. Particularly, as many details of this siege are connected in too important a manner with the story we have undertaken to relate, to allow us to pass it over in silence. The political plans of the Cardinal, when he undertook this siege, were extensive. Let us unfold them first, and then pass on to the private plans, in which, perhaps, had not less influence upon his eminence than the others. Of the important cities given up by Henry IV to the Huguenots as places of safety, there only remained La Rochelle. It became necessary, therefore, to destroy this last bulwark of Calvinism, a dangerous leaven with which the ferments of civil revolts and foreign war were constantly mingling. Spaniards, Englishmen, and Italian malcontents, adventurers of all nations, and soldiers of fortune of every sect flocked at the first summons under the standard of the Protestants, and organized themselves like a vast association, whose branches diverged freely over all parts of Europe. La Rochelle, which had derived a new importance from the ruin of the other Calvinist cities, was, then, the focus of dissensions and ambition. Moreover, its port was the last in the kingdom of France open to the English, and by closing it against England, our mortal enemy, the Cardinal completed the work of Joan of Arc and of the Duc de Guise. Thus, Bassompierre, who was at once Protestant and Catholic, Protestant by conviction and Catholic as commander of the Order of the Holy Ghost, Bassompierre, who was a German by birth and a Frenchman at heart, in short, Bassompierre, who had a distinguished command at the siege of La Rochelle, said, in charging at the head of several other Protestant nobles like himself, "You will see, gentlemen, that we shall be fools enough to take La Rochelle." And Bassompierre was right. The cannonade of the Isle of Ré presaged to him the dragonnades of the Cevennes. The taking of La Rochelle was the preface to the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. We have hinted that by the side of these views of the leveling and simplifying minister, which belong to history, the chronicler is forced to recognize the lesser motives of the amorous man and jealous rival. Richelieu, as everyone knows, had loved the Queen. Was this love a simple political affair, or was it naturally one of those profound passions which Anne of Austria inspired in those who approached her? That we are not able to say, but at all events, we have seen by the anterior developments of this story that Buckingham had the advantage over him, and in 2 or 3 circumstances, particularly that of the diamond studs, had, thanks to the devotedness of the Three Musketeers and the courage and conduct of D'Artagnan, cruelly mystified him. It was, then, Richelieu's object not only to get rid of an enemy of France, but to avenge himself on a rival. But this vengeance must be grand and striking and worthy in every way of a man who held in his hand, as his weapon for combat, the forces of a kingdom. Richelieu knew that in combating England, he combated Buckingham, that in triumphing over England, he triumphed over Buckingham. In short, that in humiliating England in the eyes of Europe, he humiliated Buckingham in the eyes of the Queen. On his side, Buckingham, in pretending to maintain the honor of England, was moved by interests exactly like those of the cardinal. Buckingham was also pursuing a private vengeance. Buckingham could not under any pretense be admitted into France as an ambassador. He wished to enter it as a conqueror. It resulted from this that the real stake in this game, which two most powerful kingdoms played for the good pleasure of two amorous men, was simply a kind look from Anne of Austria. The first advantage had been gained by Buckingham, arriving unexpectedly in sight of the Isle of Ré, with 90 vessels and nearly 20,000 men. He had surprised the Comte de Troyes, who had commanded for the king in the isle, and he had, after a bloody conflict, effected his landing. Allow us to observe in passing that in this fight perished the Baron de Chantal, that the Baron de Chantal left a little orphan girl, 18 months old, that this little girl was afterward Madame de Sévigné. The Comte de Troyes retired into the citadel at St. Martin with his garrison, and threw 100 men into a little fort called the Fort of La Prée. This event had hastened the resolutions of the cardinal, until the king and he could take the command of the siege of La Rochelle, which was determined. He had sent Monsieur to direct the first operations, and had ordered all the troops he could dispose of to march toward the theatre of war. It was of this detachment, sent as a vanguard, that our friend D'Artagnan formed a part. The king, as we have said, was to follow as soon as his bed of justice had been held. But on rising from his bed of justice on the 28th of June, he felt himself attacked by fever. He was, notwithstanding, anxious to set out, but his illness becoming more serious, he was forced to stop at Villeroy. Now, whenever the king halted, the musketeers halted. It followed that D'Artagnan, who was as yet purely and simply in the guards, found himself, for the time at least, separated from his good friends, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. This separation, which was no more than an unpleasant circumstance, would have certainly become a cause of serious uneasiness if he had not been able to guess by what unknown dangers he was surrounded. He, however, arrived without incident in the camp established before La Rochelle on the 10th of the month of September of the year 1627. Everything was in the same state. The Duke of Buckingham and his English masters of the Isle of Ré continued to besiege, but without success, the citadel of St. Martin and the fort of La Prée. And the hostilities with La Rochelle had commenced 2 or 3 days before, about a fort which the Duc d'Angoulême had caused to be constructed near the city. The guards, under the command of Monsieur Dessart, took up their quarters at the Minimes. But, as we know, D'Artagnan, possessed with ambition to enter the Musketeers, had formed but few friendships among his comrades, and he felt himself isolated and given up to his own reflections. His reflections were not very cheerful. From the time of his arrival in Paris, he had been mixed up with public affairs, but his own private affairs had made no great progress, either in love or fortune. As to love, the only woman he could have loved was Madame Bonacieux. Madame Bonacieux had disappeared, without his being able to discover what had become of her. As to fortune, he had made, humble as he was, an enemy of the cardinal. That is to say, of a man before whom trembled the greatest men of the kingdom, beginning with the king. That man had the power to crush him, and yet he had not done so. For a mind so perspicuous as that of D'Artagnan, this indulgence was a light by which he caught a glimpse of a better future. Then he had made himself another enemy, less to be feared, he thought, but nevertheless, he instinctively felt not to be despised, and this enemy was Milady. In exchange for all this, he had acquired the protection and goodwill of the Queen, but the favor of the Queen was, at the present time, an additional cause of persecution, and her protection, as it was known, protected badly, as witness Chalais and Madame Bonacieux. What he had clearly gained in all this was the diamond, worth 5,000 or 6,000 livres, which he wore on his finger, and even this diamond, supposing that D'Artagnan in his projects of ambition wished to keep it, to make it someday a pledge for the gratitude of the Queen, had not, in the meanwhile, since he could not part with it, more value than the gravel he trod under his feet. We say the gravel he trod under his feet, for D'Artagnan made these reflections while walking solitarily along a pretty little road, which led from the camp to the village of Angoutin. Now, these reflections had led him further than he intended, and the day was beginning to decline when, by the last ray of the setting sun, he thought he saw the barrel of a musket glitter from behind a hedge. D'Artagnan had a quick eye and a prompt understanding. He comprehended that the musket had not come there of itself, and that he who bore it had not concealed himself behind a hedge with any friendly intentions. He determined, therefore, to direct his course as clear from it as he could, when, on the opposite side of the road, from behind a rock, he perceived the extremity of another musket. This was evidently an ambuscade. The young man cast a glance at the first musket and saw, with a certain degree of inquietude, that it was leveled in his direction. But as soon as he perceived that the orifice of the barrel was motionless, he threw himself upon the ground. At the same instant when the gun was fired, and he heard the whistling of a ball pass over his head. No time was to be lost. D'Artagnan sprang up with a bound, and at the same instant the ball from the other musket tore up the gravel on the very spot on the road where he had thrown himself, with his face to the ground. D'Artagnan was not one of those foolhardy men who seek a ridiculous death in order that it may be said of them that they did not retreat a single step. Besides, courage was out of the question here. D'Artagnan had fallen into an ambush. "If there is a third shot," said he to himself, "I am a lost man." He immediately, therefore, took to his heels and ran toward the camp with the swiftness of the young men of his country, so renowned for their agility. But whatever might be his speed, the first who fired, having had time to reload, fired a second shot, and this time so well aimed that it struck his hat and carried it 10 paces from him. As he, however, had no other hat, he picked up this as he ran, and arrived at his quarters very pale and quite out of breath. He sat down without saying a word to anybody, and began to reflect. This event might have 3 causes. The first, and the most natural, was that it might be an ambuscade of the Rochellais, who might not be sorry to kill one of his Majesty's guards, because it would be an enemy the less, and this enemy might have a well-furnished purse in his pocket. D'Artagnan took his hat, examined the hole made by the ball, and shook his head. The ball was not a musket ball. It was an arquebus ball. The accuracy of the aim had first given him the idea that a special weapon had been employed. This could not, then, be a military ambuscade, as the ball was not of the regular caliber. This might be a kind remembrance of Monsieur the Cardinal, It may be observed that at the very moment when, thanks to the ray of the sun, he perceived the gun barrel, he was thinking with astonishment on the forbearance of his eminence with respect to him. But D'Artagnan again shook his head, for people toward whom he had but to put forth his hand, his eminence had rarely recourse to such means. It might be a vengeance of Milady. That was most probable. He tried in vain to remember the faces or dress of the assassins. He had escaped so rapidly that he had not had leisure to notice anything. "Oh, my poor friends," remarked D'Artagnan. "Are you? And that you should fail me." D'Artagnan passed a very bad night. 3 or 4 times he started up, imagining that a man was approaching his bed for the purpose of stabbing him. Nevertheless, day dawned without darkness, having brought any accident. But D'Artagnan well suspected that that which was deferred was not relinquished. D'Artagnan remained all day in his quarters, assigning as a reason to himself that the weather was bad. At 9 o'clock the next morning, the drums beat to arms. The Duc d'Orléans, Duc d'Orléans, visited the posts. The guards were under arms, and D'Artagnan took his place in the midst of his comrades. Monsieur passed along the front of the line. Then all the superior officers approached him to pay their compliments, Monsieur Dessau, captain of the guards, as well as the others. At the expiration of a minute or two, it appeared to D'Artagnan that Dessau made him a sign to approach. He waited for a fresh gesture on the part of his superior, for fear he might be mistaken. But this gesture being repeated, he left the ranks and advanced to receive orders. Monsieur is about to ask for some good men, of good will, for a dangerous mission, but one which will do honor to those who shall accomplish it. And I made you a sign in order that you might hold yourself in readiness. "Thanks, my captain," replied D'Artagnan, who wished for nothing better than an opportunity to distinguish himself under the eye of the lieutenant general. In fact, the Rochellais had made a sortie during the night, and had retaken a bastion of which the royal army had gained possession 2 days before. The matter was to ascertain, by reconnoitering, how the enemy guarded this bastion. At the end of a few minutes, Monsieur raised his voice and said, "I want for this mission 3 or 4 volunteers, led by a man who can be depended upon." "As to the man to be depended upon, I have him under my hand, monsieur," said Monsieur Dessau, pointing to D'Artagnan. "And as for the 4 or 5 volunteers, monsieur has but to make his intentions known, and the men will not be wanting." "4 men of good will, who will risk being killed with me," said D'Artagnan, raising his sword. 2 of his comrades of the guards immediately sprang forward, and 2 other soldiers having joined them, the number was deemed sufficient. D'Artagnan declined all others, being unwilling to take the first chance from those who had the priority. It was not known whether, after the taking of the bastion, the Rochellais had evacuated it or left a garrison in it. The object then was to examine the place near enough to verify the reports. D'Artagnan set out with his 4 companions, and followed the trench. The 2 guards marched abreast with him, and the 2 soldiers followed behind. They arrived thus, screened by the lining of the trench, till they came within 100 paces of the bastion. There, on turning round, D'Artagnan perceived that the 2 soldiers had disappeared. He thought that, beginning to be afraid, they had stayed behind, and he continued to advance. At the turning of the counterscarp, they found themselves within about 60 paces of the bastion. They saw no one, and the bastion seemed abandoned. The 3 composing our forlorn hope were deliberating whether they should proceed any further, when all at once a circle of smoke enveloped the giant of stone. and a dozen balls came whistling around D'Artagnan and his companions. They knew all they wished to know. The bastion was guarded. A longer stay in this dangerous spot would have been useless imprudence. D'Artagnan and his two companions turned their backs and commenced a retreat which resembled a flight. On arriving at the angle of the trench, which was to serve them as a rampart, one of the guardsmen fell. A ball had passed through his breast. The other, who was safe and sound, continued his way toward the camp. D'Artagnan was not willing to abandon his companion thus, and stooped to raise him and assist him in regaining the lines. But at this moment, 2 shots were fired. One ball struck the head of the already wounded guard, and the other flattened itself against a rock after having passed within 2 inches of D'Artagnan. The young man turned quickly round, for this attack could not have come from the bastion, which was hidden by the angle of the trench. The idea of the 2 soldiers who had abandoned him occurred to his mind, and with them he remembered the assassins of 2 evenings before. He resolved this time to know with whom he had to deal, and fell upon the body of his comrade as if he were dead. He quickly saw 2 heads appear above an abandoned work within 30 paces of him. They were the heads of the 2 soldiers. D'Artagnan had not been deceived. These 2 men had only followed for the purpose of assassinating him, hoping that the young man's death would be placed to the account of the enemy. As he might be only wounded and might denounce their crime, they came up to him with the purpose of making sure. Fortunately, deceived by D'Artagnan's trick, they neglected to reload their guns. When they were within 10 paces of him, D'Artagnan, who in falling had taken care not to let go his sword, sprang up close to them. The assassins comprehended that if they fled toward the camp without having killed their man, they should be accused by him. Therefore, their first idea was to join the enemy. One of them took his gun by the barrel and used it as he would a club. He aimed a terrible blow at D'Artagnan, who avoided it by springing to one side. But by this movement, he left a passage free to the bandit, who darted off toward the bastion. As the Rochellais, who guarded the bastion, were ignorant of the intentions of the man they saw coming toward them, they fired upon him, and he fell, struck by a ball which broke his shoulder. Meantime, D'Artagnan had thrown himself upon the other soldier, attacking him with his sword. The conflict was not long. The wretch had nothing to defend himself with but his discharged arquebus. The sword of the guardsman slipped along the barrel of the now useless weapon, and passed through the thigh of the assassin, who fell. D'Artagnan immediately placed the point of the sword at his throat. "Oh, do not kill me!" cried the bandit. Pardon, my officer, and I will tell you all." "Is your secret of enough importance to me to spare your life for it?" asked the young man, withholding his arm. "Yes, if you think existence worth anything of a man of 20, as you are, and who may hope for everything, being handsome and brave as you are." "Wretch!" cried D'Artagnan, "speak quickly. Who employed you to assassinate me?" "A woman whom I don't know, but who is called Milady." "But if you don't know this woman, how do you know her name?" "My comrade knows her, and called her so, and it was with him she agreed, and not with me. He even has in his pocket a letter from that person, who attaches great importance to you, as I have heard him say." "But how did you become concerned in this villainous affair?" "He proposed to me to undertake it with him, and I agreed." "And how much did she give you for this fine enterprise?" 100 louis. "Well, come," said the young man, laughing. "She thinks I am worth something. 100 louis. Well, that was a temptation for 2 wretches like you. I understand why you accepted it, and I grant you my pardon, but under one condition." "What is that?" said the soldier, uneasy at perceiving that all was not over. "That you will go and fetch me the letter your comrade has in his pocket." "But," cried the bandit, "that is only another way of killing me. How can I go and fetch that letter under the fire of the bastion? You must nevertheless make up your mind to go and get it, or I swear you shall die by my hand." "Pardon, monsieur. Pity! In the name of that young lady you love, and whom you perhaps believe dead, but who is not," cried the bandit, throwing himself upon his knees and leaning upon his hand, where he began to lose his strength with his blood. "And how do you know there is a young woman whom I love, and I believe that woman dead?" asked D'Artagnan. "By that letter which my comrade has in his pocket." "You see, then," said D'Artagnan, "that I must have that letter, so no more delay, no more hesitation, or else whatever may be my repugnance to soiling my sword a second time with the blood of a wretch like you, I swear, by my faith as an honest man." And at these words, D'Artagnan made so fierce a gesture that the wounded man sprang up. "Stop! Stop!" cried he, regaining strength by force of terror. "I will go! I will go!" D'Artagnan took the soldier's arquebus, made him go on before him, and urged him toward his companion by pricking him behind with his sword. It was a frightful thing to see this wretch, leaving a long track of blood on the ground he passed over, pale with approaching death, trying to drag himself along without being seen to the body of his accomplice, which lay 20 paces from him. Terror was so strongly painted on his face, covered with a cold sweat, that D'Artagnan took pity on him, and casting upon him a look of contempt, "Stop," said he, "I will show you the difference between a man of courage and such a coward as you. Stay where you are. I will go myself." And with a light step, an eye on the watch, observing the movements of the enemy and taking advantage of the accidents of the ground, D'Artagnan succeeded in reaching the second soldier. There were two means of gaining his object: to search him on the spot, or to carry him away, making a buckler of his body, and search him in the trench. D'Artagnan preferred the second means, and lifted the assassin onto his shoulders at the moment the enemy fired. A slight shock, the dull noise of 3 balls which penetrated the flesh, a last cry, a convulsion of agony, proved to D'Artagnan that the would-be assassin had saved his life. D'Artagnan regained the trench, and threw the corpse beside the wounded man, who was as pale as death. Then he began to search. A leather pocketbook, a purse, in which was evidently a part of the sum which the bandit had received, with a dice box and dice, completed the possessions of the dead man. He left the box and dice where they fell, and threw the purse to the wounded man, who eagerly opened the pocketbook. Among some unimportant papers, he found the following letter, that which he had sought at the risk of his life. "Since you have lost sight of that woman, and she is now in safety in the convent, which you should never have allowed her to reach, try, at least, not to miss the man. If you do, you know that my hand reaches far, and that you shall pay very dearly for the 100 louis you have from me." No signature. Nevertheless, it was plain the letter came from Milady. He consequently kept it as a piece of evidence, and being in safety behind the angle of the trench, he began to interrogate the wounded man. He confessed that he had undertaken, with his comrade, the same who was killed, to carry off a young woman who was to leave Paris by the Barrière de la Villette. But having stopped to drink at a cabaret, they had missed the carriage by 10 minutes. "But what were you to do with that woman?" asked D'Artagnan with anguish. "We were to have conveyed her to a hotel in the Place Royale," said the wounded man. "Yes, yes," murmured D'Artagnan. "What's the place?" "Milady's own residence." Then the young man tremblingly comprehended what a terrible thirst for vengeance urged this woman on to destroy him, as well as all who loved him, and how well she must be acquainted with the affairs of the court, since she had discovered all. There could be no doubt she owed this information to the cardinal. But amid all this he perceived, with a feeling of real joy, that the queen must have discovered the prison in which poor Madame Bonacieux was explaining her devotion, and that she had freed her from that prison, and the letter he had received from the young woman, and her passage along the road of Chaillot, like an apparition, were now explained. Then also, as Athos had predicted, it became possible to find Madame Bonacieux. The convent was not impregnable. The idea completely restored clemency to his heart. He turned toward the wounded man, who had watched with intense anxiety all the various expressions of his countenance, and holding out his arm to him, said, "Come, I will not abandon you thus. Lean upon me, and let us return to the camp." "Yes," said the man, who could scarcely believe in such magnanimity. "But is it not to have me hanged?" "You have my word," said he. "For the second time, I give you your life." The wounded man sank upon his knees to again kiss the feet of his preserver, but D'Artagnan, who had no longer a motive for staying so near the enemy, abridged the testimonials of his gratitude. The guardsman who had returned at the first discharge announced the death of his 4 companions. They were therefore much astonished and delighted in the regiment when they saw the young man come back safe and sound. D'Artagnan explained the sword wound of his companion by a sortie which he improvised. He described the death of the other soldier and the perils they had encountered. This recital was, for him, the occasion of veritable triumph. The whole army talked of this expedition for a day, and Monsieur paid him his compliments upon it. Besides this, as every great action bears its recompense with it, the brave exploit of D'Artagnan resulted in the restoration of the tranquillity he had lost. In fact, D'Artagnan believed that he might be tranquil, as one of his 2 enemies was killed, and the other devoted to his interests. This tranquillity proved one thing: that D'Artagnan did not yet know Milady. That brings us to the end of chapter 41. A very ominous end at that. See, through a little bit of tribulation and trial, and only left with a vague feeling of unease. All right. Let's continue now with chapter 42, the Anjou wine. After the most disheartening news of the king's health, a report of his convalescence began to prevail in the camp. And as he was very anxious to be in person at the siege, it was said that as soon as he could mount a horse, he would set forward. In the meantime, Monsieur, who knew that from one day to the other he might expect to be removed from his command by the Duc d'Angoulême, by Bassompierre, or by Schomberg, who were all eager for his post, did but little, lost his days in wavering, and did not dare to attempt any great enterprise to drive the English from the Isle of Ré, where they still besieged the citadel of St. Martin and the fort of La Prée. As on their side, the French were besieging La Rochelle. D'Artagnan, as we have said, had become more tranquil, as always happens after a past danger, particularly when the danger seems to have vanished. He only felt one uneasiness, and that was at not hearing any tidings from his friends. But one morning, at the commencement of the month of November, everything was explained to him by this letter, dated from Villeroy. Monsieur d'Artagnan, Messieurs Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, after having had an entertainment at my house, and enjoying themselves very much, created such a disturbance that the provost of the castle, a wretched man, has ordered them to be confined for some days, but I accomplish the order they have given me by forwarding to you a dozen bottles of my Anjou wine, with which they are much pleased. They are desirous that you should drink to their health in their favorite wine. I have done this, and am, Monsieur, with great respect, your very humble and obedient servant, Godot, purveyor of the Musketeers. Yes, of course. That's perfect. That's just perfect. The Three Musketeers get set up, get ready for a campaign, and what do? They get angry drunk and kick up a fuss and get house arrested. That is perfect. "That's all well," cried D'Artagnan. "They think of me in their pleasures, as I thought of them in my troubles. Well, I will certainly drink to their health with all my heart, but I will not drink alone." And D'Artagnan went among those guardsmen with whom he had formed greater intimacy than with the others, to invite them to enjoy with him this present of delicious Anjou wine, which had been sent him from Villeroy. One of the two guardsmen was engaged that evening, and another the next, so the meeting was fixed for the day after that. D'Artagnan, on his return, sent the 12 bottles of wine to the refreshment room of the guards, with strict orders that great care should be taken of it. And then, on the day appointed, as the dinner was fixed for midday, D'Artagnan sent Planchet at 9 in the morning to assist in preparing everything for the entertainment. Planchet, very proud of being raised to the dignity of landlord, thought he would make all ready, like an intelligent man, and with this view called in the assistance of the lackey of one of his master's guests, named Poirot, and the false soldier who had tried to kill D'Artagnan, and who, belonging to no corps, had entered into the service of D'Artagnan, or rather of Planchet, after D'Artagnan had saved his life. The hour of the banquet being come, the two guards arrived, took their places, and the dishes were arranged on the table. Planchet waited, towel on arm. Poirot uncorked the bottles, and Brisemont, which was the name of the convalescent, poured the wine, which was a little shaken by its journey, carefully into decanters. Of this wine, the first bottle being a little thick at the bottom, Brisemont poured the lees into a glass, and D'Artagnan desired him to drink it, for the poor devil had not yet recovered his strength. The guests, having eaten the soup, were about to lift the first glass of wine to their lips, when all at once the cannon sounded from Fort Louis and from Fort Neuf, and the guardsmen, imagining this to be caused by some unexpected attack, either of the besieged or the English, sprang to their swords. D'Artagnan, not less forward than they, did likewise, and all ran out in order to repair to their posts. But scarcely were they out of the room before they were made aware of the cause of this noise. Cries of "Live the King! Live the Cardinal!" resounded on every side, and the drums were beaten in all directions. In short, the king, impatient, as has been said, had come by forced marches, and had that moment arrived with all his household and a reinforcement of 10,000 troops. His musketeers preceded and followed him. D'Artagnan, placed in line with his company, saluted with an expressive gesture his three friends, whose eyes soon discovered him, and Monsieur de Tréville, who detected him at once. The ceremony of reception over, the four friends were soon in one another's arms. "Pardieu!" cried D'Artagnan. "You could not have arrived in better time. The dinner cannot have had time to get cold, can it, gentlemen?" added the young man, turning to the two guards, whom he introduced to his friends. "Ah!" said Porthos. "It appears we are feasting." "I hope," said Aramis, "there are no women at your dinner." "Is there any drinkable wine in your tavern?" asked Athos. "Well, pardieu, there is yours, my dear friend," replied D'Artagnan. "Our wine," said Athos, astonished. "Yes, that you sent me. We sent you wine." "You know very well the wine from the hills of Anjou." "Yes, I know what brand you are talking about." "The wine you prefer?" "Well, in the absence of champagne and chambertin, you must content yourself with that." And so, connoisseurs in wine as we are, we have sent you some Anjou wine," said Porthos. "Not exactly. It is the wine that was sent by your order." "On our account," said the Three Musketeers. "Did you send this wine, Aramis?" said Athos. No. And you, Porthos? No. And you, Athos? No. If it was not you, it was your purveyor, said D'Artagnan. Our purveyor! Yes, your purveyor, Godeau, the purveyor of the Musketeers. My faith! Never mind where it comes from, said Porthos. Let us taste it, and if it is good, let us drink it. No, said Athos, don't let us drink wine which comes from an unknown source. You are right, Athos, said D'Artagnan. Did none of you charge your purveyor, Godeau, to send me some wine? No, and yet you say he has sent you some as from us. Here is his letter, said D'Artagnan, and he presented the note to his comrades. This is not his writing, said Athos. I am acquainted with it. Before we left Villeroy, I settled the accounts of the regiment. False letter altogether, said Porthos. We have not been disciplined. I would have believed if they were. D'Artagnan, said Aramis in a reproachful tone, how could you believe that we had made a disturbance? D'Artagnan grew pale, and a convulsive trembling shook all his limbs. Thou alarmest me, said Athos, who never used thee and thou, but upon very particular occasions. What has happened? Look at you, my friends, said D'Artagnan. A horrible suspicion crosses my mind. Can this be another vengeance of that woman? It was now Athos who turned pale. D'Artagnan rushed toward the refreshment room, the three Musketeers and the two guards following him. The first object that met the eyes of D'Artagnan on entering the room was Brisemont, stretched upon the ground and rolling in horrible convulsions. Planchet and Fourreau, as pale as death, were trying to give him succor, but it was plain that all assistance was useless. All the features of the dying man were distorted with agony. "Ah!" cried he on perceiving D'Artagnan. "Ah! This is frightful! You pretend to pardon me, and you poison me!" "I!" cried D'Artagnan. "I! Wretch! What do you say?" "I say that it was you who gave me the wine. I say that it was you who desired me to drink it. I say that you wished to avenge yourself on me. And I say that it is horrible." "Do not think so, Brisemont," said D'Artagnan. "Do not think so. I swear to you, I protest." "Oh, but God is above. God will punish you. My God, grant that he may one day suffer what I suffer." "Upon the gospel," said D'Artagnan, throwing himself down by the dying man, "I swear to you that the wine was poisoned, and that I was going to drink of it as you did." "I do not believe you," said the soldier, and he expired amid horrible tortures. "Frightful, frightful," murmured Athos, while Porthos broke the bottles and Aramis gave orders, a little too late, that a confessor should be sent for. "Oh, my friends," said D'Artagnan, "you come once more to save my life, not only mine, but that of these gentlemen. Gentlemen," continued he, addressing the guardsmen, "I request you will be silent with regard to this adventure. Great personages may have had a hand in what you have seen, and if talked about, the evil would only recoil upon us." "Ah, monsieur," stammered Planchet, more dead than alive. "Ah, monsieur, what an escape I have had!" "How, sirrah? You are going to drink my wine? To the health of the king, monsieur. I was going to drink a small glass of it, if Fourreau had not told me I was called." "Alas," said Fourreau, whose teeth chattered with terror, "I wanted to get him out of the way, that I might drink myself." "Gentlemen," said D'Artagnan, addressing the guardsmen, "you may easily comprehend that such a feast can only be very dull after what has taken place. So accept my excuses, and put off the party till another day, I beg of you." The two guardsmen courteously accepted D'Artagnan's excuse, and perceiving that the four friends desired to be alone, retired. When the young guardsmen and the three Musketeers were without witnesses, they looked at one another with an air which plainly expressed that each of them perceived the gravity of their situation. "In the first place," said Athos, "let us leave this chamber. The dead are not agreeable company, particularly when they have died a violent death." "Planchet," said D'Artagnan, "I commit the corpse of this poor devil to your care. Let him be interred in holy ground. He committed a crime, it is true, but he repented of it." And the four friends quit the room, leaving to Planchet and Fourreau the duty of paying mortuary honors to Brisemont. The host gave them another chamber, and served them with fresh eggs and some water, which Athos went himself to draw at the fountain. In a few words, Porthos and Aramis were posted as to the situation. "Well," said D'Artagnan to Athos, "you see, my dear friend, that this is war to the death." Athos shook his head. "Yes, yes," replied he, "I perceive that plainly. But do you really believe it is she?" "I am sure of it. Nevertheless, I confess I still doubt." "But the fleur-de-lis on her shoulder?" "She is some Englishwoman who has committed a crime in France, and has been branded in consequence." "Athos, she is your wife, I tell you," repeated D'Artagnan. "Only reflect how much the two descriptions resemble each other." "Yes, but I should think the other must be dead. I hanged her so effectually." It was D'Artagnan who now shook his head in turn. "But in either case, what is to be done?" said the young man. "The fact is, one cannot remain thus, with a sword hanging eternally over his head," said Athos. "We must extricate ourselves from this position." "But how?" "Listen. You must try to see her, and have an explanation with her. Say to her, peace or war. My sword is as a gentleman never to say anything of you, never to do anything against you. On your side, a solemn oath to remain neutral with respect to me. If not, I will apply to the Chancellor. I will apply to the King. I will apply to the hangman. I will move the courts against you. I will denounce you as branded. I will bring you to trial. And if you are acquitted, well, by the faith of a gentleman, I will kill you at the corner of some wall, as I would a mad dog." "I like the means well enough," said D'Artagnan. "But where and how to meet with her?" "Time, dear friend. Time brings round opportunity. Opportunity is the martingale of man. The more we have ventured, the more we gain, when we know how to wait." "Yes, but to wait, surrounded by assassins and poisoners." "Bah!" said Athos. "God has preserved us hitherto. God will preserve us still." "Yes, we. Besides, we are men, and everything considered, it is our lot to risk our lives. But she?" asked he in an undertone. "What she?" "Constance. Madame Bonacieux." "Ah, that's true," said Athos. My poor friend, I had forgotten you were in love." Well, but," said Aramis, "have you not learned by the letter you found on the wretched corpse that she is in a convent? One may be very comfortable in a convent, and as soon as the siege of La Rochelle is terminated, I promise you on my part—" "Good," cried Athos, "good. Yes, my dear Aramis, we all know that your views have a religious tendency." "I was only temporarily a musketeer," said Aramis humbly. "It is some time since we have heard from his mistress," said Athos in a low voice, "but take no notice. We know all about that." "Well," said Porthos, "it appears to me that the means are very simple." "What?" asked D'Artagnan. "You say she is in a convent?" replied Porthos. "Yes." "Very well. As soon as the siege is over, we'll carry her off from that convent." "But we must first learn what convent she is in." "True," said Porthos. But I think I have it," said Athos. "Don't you say, dear D'Artagnan, that it is the queen who has made choice of the convent for her?" "I believe so, at least." "In that case, Porthos will assist us." "And how so, if you please?" "Why, by your marchioness, your duchess, your princess. She must have a long arm." "Hush!" said Porthos, placing a finger on his lip. "I believe her to be a cardinalist. She must know nothing of the matter." "Then," said Aramis, "I take upon myself to obtain intelligence of her." "You, Aramis?" cried the three friends. "You? And how?" "By the Queen's almoner, to whom I am very intimately allied," said Aramis, coloring. And on this assurance, the four friends, who had finished their modest repast, separated, with the promise of meeting again that evening. D'Artagnan returned to less important affairs, and the three Musketeers repaired to the king's quarters, where they had to prepare their lodging. And that brings us to the end of chapter 42. All right. So yeah, that was a bit of a twist. It was actually, yeah, you're right. It was a very easy sell that they had gotten into a drunken ruckus and caused trouble and gotten themselves into a fit. The assassins and Milady, yeah, they might have them fingered. Just saying. All right. So let's continue now with chapter 33, the sign of the red dovecot. Meanwhile, the king, who, with more reason than the cardinal, showed his hatred for Buckingham, although scarcely arrived, was in such a haste to meet the enemy that he commanded every disposition to be made to drive the English from the Isle of Ré, and afterward to press the siege of La Rochelle. But notwithstanding his earnest wish, he was delayed by the dissensions which broke out between Messieurs Bassompierre and Schomberg against the Duc d'Angoulême. Messieurs Bassompierre and Schomberg were marshals of France, and claimed their right of commanding the army under the orders of the king, but the cardinal, who feared that Bassompierre, a Huguenot at heart, might press but feebly the English in Rochelle, his brothers in religion, supported the Duc d'Angoulême, whom the king, at his instigation, had named lieutenant general. The result was that, to prevent Messieurs Bassompierre and Schomberg from deserting the army, a separate command had to be given to each. Bassompierre took up his quarters on the north of the city, between Leu and Dompierre. The Duc d'Angoulême on the east, from Dompierre to Périgny, and Monsieur de Schomberg on the south, from Périgny to Angoutin. The quarters of Monsieur were at Dompierre. The quarters of the king were sometimes at Estrée, sometimes at Jarret. The cardinal's quarters were upon the downs, at the bridge of La Pierre, in a simple house, without any entrenchment, so that Monsieur watched Bassompierre, the king, the Duc d'Angoulême, and the cardinal, Monsieur de Schomberg. As soon as this organization was established, they set about driving the English from the Isle. The juncture was favorable. The English, who require, above everything, good living in order to be good soldiers, only eating salt meat and bad biscuit, had made many invalids in their camp. That's a dig at the English for certain. Still further, the sea, very rough at this period of the year, all along the sea coast, destroyed every day some little vessel, and the shore, from the point of l'Aiguillon to the trenches, was at every tide literally covered with the wrecks of pinnacles, roberges, and feluccas. The result was that even if the king's troops remained quietly in their camp, it was evident that some day or other Buckingham, who only continued in the Isle from obstinacy, would be obliged to raise the siege. But as Monsieur de Toiras gave information that everything was preparing in the enemy's camp for a fresh assault, the king judged that it would be best to put an end to the affair, and gave the necessary orders for decisive action. As it is not our intention to give a journal of the siege, but on the contrary, only to describe such of the events of it as are connected with the story we are relating, we will content ourselves with saying, in 2 words, that the expedition succeeded, to the great astonishment of the king and the great glory of the cardinal. The English, repulsed foot by foot beaten in all encounters and defeated in the passage of the Isle of Louis, were obliged to re-embark, leaving on the field of battle 2,000 men, among whom were 5 colonels, 3 lieutenant colonels, 250 captains, 20 gentlemen of rank, 4 pieces of cannon, and 60 flags, which were taken to Paris by Claude de Saint-Simon, and suspended with great pomp in the arches of Notre Dame. 2 Deumes were chanted in camp, and afterward throughout France. The cardinal was left free to carry on the siege without having, at the least at the present, anything to fear on the part of the English. But it must be acknowledged, this response was but momentary. An envoy of the Duke of Buckingham, named Montague, was taken, and proof was obtained of a league between the German Empire, Spain, England, and Lorraine. This league was directed against France. Still further, in Buckingham's lodging, which he had been forced to abandon more precipitately than he expected, papers were found which confirmed this alliance, and which, as the cardinal asserts in his memoirs, strongly compromised Madame de Chevreuse, and consequently the Queen. It was upon the cardinal that all the responsibility fell, for one is not a despotic minister without responsibility. All, therefore, of the vast resources of his genius were at work night and day, engaged in listening to the least report heard in any of the great kingdoms of Europe. The cardinal was acquainted with the activity, and more particularly the hatred of Buckingham. If the league, which threatened France, triumphed, all his influence would be lost. Spanish policy and Austrian policy would have their representatives in the cabinet of the Louvre, where they had as yet but partisans, and he, Richelieu, the French minister, the national minister, would be ruined. The king, even while obeying him like a child, hated him as a child hates his master, and would abandon him to the personal vengeance of Monsieur and the Queen. He would then be lost, and France, perhaps, with him. All this must be prepared against. Courtiers, becoming every instant more numerous, succeeded one another day and night in the little house of the Bridge of La Pierre, in which the cardinal had established his residence. There were monks who wore the frock with such an ill grace that it was easy to perceive they belonged to the church militant. A woman a little inconvenienced by their costume as pages, and whose large trousers could not entirely conceal their rounded forms, and peasants with blackened hands but with fine limbs, savoring of the man of quality a league off. There were also less agreeable visits. For 2 or 3 times reports were spread that the cardinal had nearly been assassinated. It is true that the enemies of the cardinal said that it was he himself who set these bungling assassins to work, in order to have, if wanted, the right of using reprisals. But we must not believe everything ministers say, nor everything their enemies say. These attempts did not prevent the cardinal, to whom his most inveterate detractors have never denied personal bravery, from making nocturnal excursions, sometimes to communicate to the Duc d'Angoulême important orders, sometimes to confer with the king, and sometimes to have an interview with a messenger whom he did not wish to see at home. On their part, the Musketeers, who had not much to do with the siege, were not under very strict orders, and led a joyous life. This was the more easy for our 3 companions in particular, for being friends of Monsieur de Treville, they obtained from him special permission to be absent after the closing of the camp. Now, one evening, when D'Artagnan, who was in the trenches, was not able to accompany them, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, mounted on their battle steeds, enveloped in their war cloaks, with their hands upon their pistol butts, were returning from a drinking place called the Red Dovecot, which Athos had discovered 2 days before upon the route to Jarry. following the road which led to the camp and quite on their guard, as we have stated, for fear of an ambuscade, when, about a quarter of a league from the village of Bonat, they fancied they heard the sound of horses approaching them. They immediately, all three halted, closed in, and waited, occupying the middle of the road. In an instant, and as the moon broke from behind a cloud, they saw, at a turning of the road, two horsemen, who, on perceiving them, stopped in their turn, appearing to deliberate whether they should continue their route or go back. The hesitation created some suspicion in the three friends, and Athos, advancing a few paces in front of the others, cried in a firm voice, "Who goes there?" "Who goes there yourselves?" replied one of the horsemen. "That is not an answer. Who goes there? Answer, or we charge." "Beware of what you are about, gentlemen," said a clear voice which seemed accustomed to command. "It is some superior officer making his night round," said Athos. "What do you wish, gentlemen?" "Who are you?" said the same voice, in the same commanding tone. "Answer in your turn, or you may repent your disobedience." "King's Musketeers," said Athos, more and more convinced that he who interrogated them had the right to do so. "What company?" "Company of Tréville." "Advance, and give an account of what you are doing here at this hour." The three companions advanced rather humbly, for all were now convinced that they had to do with someone more powerful than themselves, leaving Athos the post of speaker. One of the two riders, who had spoken second, was 10 paces in front of his companion. Athos made a sign to Porthos and Aramis, also to remain in the rear, and advanced alone. "Your pardon, my officer," said Athos, "but we were ignorant with whom we had to do, and you may see that we were keeping good guard." "Your name," said the officer, who covered a part of his face with his cloak. "But yourself, monsieur," said Athos, who began to be annoyed by this inquisition. "Give me, I beg you, the proof that you have the right to question me." "Your name," repeated the cavalier a second time, letting his cloak fall and leaving his face uncovered. "Monsieur the Cardinal!" cried the stupefied musketeer. "Your name," cried his eminence, for the third time. "Athos," said the musketeer. The cardinal made a sign to his attendant, who drew near. "These 3 musketeers shall follow us," said he, in an undertone. "I am not willing it should be known that I have left the camp, and if they follow us, we shall be certain they will tell nobody." "We are gentlemen, monseigneur," said Athos. "Require our parole, and give yourself no uneasiness. Thank God, we can keep a secret." The cardinal fixed his piercing eyes upon this courageous speaker. "You have a quick ear, Monsieur Athos," said the cardinal. "But now, listen to this. It is not from mistrust that I request you to follow me, but for my security. Your companions are no doubt Messieurs Porthos and Aramis." "Yes, your eminence," said Athos, while the 2 musketeers who had remained behind advanced, hat in hand. "I know you, gentlemen," said the cardinal. "I know you. I know you are not quite my friends, and I am sorry you are not so. But I know you are brave and loyal gentlemen, and that confidence may be placed in you. Monsieur Athos, do me then the honor to accompany me, you and your 2 friends, and then I shall have an escort to excite envy in his majesty, if we should meet him." The 3 musketeers bowed to the necks of their horses. "Well, upon my honor," said Athos, "your eminence is right in taking us with you. We have seen several ill-looking faces on the road, and we have even had a quarrel at the Red Dovecot with 4 of those faces." "A quarrel? And for what, gentlemen?" said the cardinal. "You know I don't like quarrelers." "And that is the reason why I have the honor to inform your eminence of what has happened, for you might learn it from others, and upon a false account believe us to be in fault." "What have been the results of your quarrel?" said the cardinal, knitting his brow. "My friend, Aramis here, has received a slight sword wound in the arm, but not enough to prevent him, as your eminence may see, from mounting to the assault tomorrow, if your eminence orders an escalade." "But You are not the men to allow sword wounds to be inflicted upon you thus, said the cardinal. Come, be frank, gentlemen. You have settled accounts with somebody. Confess, you know I have the right of giving absolution. I, Monseigneur, said Athos, I did not even draw my sword, but I took him who offended me round the body and threw him out of the window. It appears that, in falling, continued Athos with some hesitation, he broke his thigh. Ah, said the cardinal, and you, Monsieur Porthos? I, Monseigneur, knowing that dueling is prohibited, I seized a bench and gave one of those brigands such a blow that I believe his shoulder is broken. Very well, said the cardinal, and you, Monsieur Aramis? Monsieur, being of a very mild disposition, and being likewise, of which Monseigneur perhaps is not aware, about to enter into orders, I endeavoured to appease my comrades, when one of those wretches gave me a wound with a sword, treacherously, against my left arm. Then I admit my patience failed me. I drew my sword in my turn, and as he came back to the charge, I felt that, in throwing himself upon me, he let it pass through his body. I only know for certainty that he fell, and it seemed to me that he was borne away with his two companions. The devil, gentlemen, said the cardinal. 3 men placed hors de combat in a cabaret squabble. You don't do your work by halves. And pray, what was this quarrel about? These fellows were drunk, said Athos, and knowing there was a lady who had arrived at the cabaret this evening, they wanted to force her door. Force her door? Said the cardinal. And for what purpose? To do her violence, without doubt, said Athos. I have the honor of informing your eminence that these men were drunk. And was this lady young and handsome? Asked the cardinal, with a certain degree of anxiety. We did not see her, Monseigneur, said Athos. You did not see her? Ah, very well, replied the cardinal quickly. You did well to defend the honor of a woman, and as I am going to the Red Dovecot myself, I shall know if you have told me the truth. Monseigneur, said Athos haughtily, we are gentlemen, and to save our heads, we would not be guilty of a falsehood. Therefore, I do not doubt what you say, Monsieur Athos. I do not doubt it for a single instant. But, added he, to change the conversation, was this lady alone? The lady had a cavalier shut up with her, said Athos, but as notwithstanding the noise, this cavalier did not show himself. It is to be presumed that he is a coward. Judge not rashly, says the gospel, replied the cardinal. Athos bowed. And now, gentlemen, that's well, continued the cardinal. I know what I wish to know. Follow me. The 3 musketeers passed behind his eminence, who again enveloped his face in his cloak, and put his horse in motion, keeping from 8 to 10 paces in advance of his 4 companions. They soon arrived at the silent, solitary inn. No doubt the host knew what illustrious visitor was expected, and had consequently sent intruders out of the way. 10 paces from the door, the cardinal made a sign to his esquire and the 3 musketeers to halt. A saddled horse was fastened to the window shutter. The cardinal knocked 3 times, and in a peculiar manner. A man, enveloped in a cloak, came out immediately and exchanged some rapid words with the cardinal, after which he mounted his horse and set off in the direction of Surgères, which was likewise the way to Paris. Advance, gentlemen, said the cardinal. You have told me the truth, my gentlemen, said he, addressing the musketeers, and it will not be my fault if your encounter this evening be not advantageous to you. In the meantime, follow me. The cardinal alighted. The 3 musketeers did likewise. The cardinal threw the bridle of his horse to his esquire. The 3 musketeers fastened the horses to the shutters. The host stood at the door, For him, the cardinal was only an officer, coming to visit a lady. "Have you any chamber on the ground floor where these gentlemen can wait near a good fire?" said the cardinal. The host opened the door of a large room, in which an old stove had just been replaced by a large and excellent chimney. "I have this," said he. "That will do," replied the cardinal. "Enter, gentlemen, and be kind enough to wait for me. I shall not be more than half an hour." And while the three musketeers entered the ground floor room, the cardinal, without asking further information, ascended the staircase like a man who has no need of having his road pointed out to him. That brings us to the end of chapter 33, wherein the Three Musketeers had an unexpected encounter with the cardinal himself. We knew he was about, but now we know he's up to something as well. Likely. My guess would be it's Milady up in the room, and her cavalier was the man of Mung. Because these things tend to be cyclical like that. We'll find out pretty quickly, I'm sure. But for now, let's go ahead and take a quick break, top up your drinks, stretch your legs, and we'll be back in just a couple minutes, wherein we will continue with the Three Musketeers. All right, we are back. Let's see. Make sure we've been keeping it good. No drop frames. Looks like YouTube is cooperating this time around. Huzzah, huzzah! All right. So, let us continue now with the Three Musketeers from chapter 44. The quality, or the utility, of stovepipes. That sounds to me like someone's going to be eavesdropping, but let's leave that for Dumas to tell us. It was evident that without suspecting it, and actuated solely by their chivalrous and adventurous character, our three friends had just rendered a service to someone the Cardinal honored with his special protection. Now, who was that someone? That was the question the Three Musketeers put to one another. Then, seeing that none of their replies could throw any light on the subject, Porthos called the host and asked for dice. Porthos and Aramis placed themselves at the table and began to play. Athos walked about in a contemplative mood. While thinking and walking, Athos passed and repassed before the pipe of the stove, broken in halves, the other extremity passing into the chamber above, and every time he passed and repassed, he heard a murmur of words, which, at length, fixed his attention. Athos went close to it, and distinguished some words that appeared to merit so great an interest, that he made a sign to his friends to be silent, remaining himself bent with his ear directed to the opening of the lower orifice. "Listen, milady," said the cardinal. "The affair is important. Sit down and let us talk it over." "Milady," murmured Athos, "I listen to your eminence with greatest attention," replied a female voice which made the musketeer start. "A small vessel with an English crew, whose captain is on my side, awaits you at the mouth of Charente, at Fort La Pointe. He will set sail tomorrow morning." "I must go thither tonight?" "Instantly. That is to say, when you have received my instructions. 2 men, whom you will find at the door on going out, will serve you as escort, and you will allow me to leave first. Then, after half an hour, you can go away in your turn." "Yes, Monseigneur. Now, let us return to the mission with which you wish to charge me, and as I desire to continue to merit the confidence of your eminence, deign to unfold it to me in terms clear and precise, that I may not commit an error." There was an instant of profound silence between the two interlocutors. It was evident that the cardinal was weighing beforehand the terms in which he was about to speak, and that Milady was collecting all her intellectual faculties to comprehend the things he was about to say, and to engrave them in her memory when they should be spoken. Athos took advantage of this moment to tell his 2 companions to fasten the door inside, and to make them a sign to come and listen with him. The 2 musketeers, who loved their ease, brought a chair for each of themselves, and one for Athos. All 3 then sat down with their heads together and their ears on the alert. "You will go to London," continued the cardinal. "Arrived in London, you will seek Buckingham." "I must beg your eminence to observe," said Milady, "that since the affair of the diamond studs, about which the Duke always suspected me, his Grace distrusts me." "Well, this time," said the cardinal, "it is necessary to steal his confidence. Or it is not necessary to steal his confidence, but to present yourself frankly and loyally as a negotiator." "Frankly and loyally," repeated Milady, with an unspeakable expression of duplicity. Yes, frankly and loyally, replied the cardinal in the same tone. All this negotiation must be carried on openly. I will follow your eminence's instructions to the letter. I only wait till you give them. You will go to Buckingham in my behalf, and you will tell him that I am acquainted with all the preparations he has made, and that they give me no uneasiness, since, at the first step he takes, I will ruin the Queen. Will he believe that your eminence is in a position to accomplish the threat thus made? Yes, for I have the proofs. I must be able to present these proofs for his appreciation. Without doubt, and you will tell him, I will publish the report of Robert and the Marquis de Beautru upon the interview which the Duke had at the residence of Madame the Constable with the Queen on the evening Madame the Constable gave a masquerade. You will tell him, in order that he may not doubt, that he came there in the costume of the great Mogul, which the Chevalier de Guise was to have worn, and that he purchased this exchange for the sum of 3,000 pistoles. Well, Monseigneur? All the details of his coming into and going out of the palace on the night when he introduced himself in the character of an Italian fortune-teller, you will tell him, that he may not doubt the correctness of my information, that he had under his cloak a large white robe dotted with black tears, death's heads, and crossbones, for in case of a surprise, he was to pass for the phantom of the White Lady, who, as all the world knows, appears at the Louvre every time any great event is impending. Is that all, Monseigneur? Tell him also that I am acquainted with all the details of the adventure at Amiens, that I will have a little romance made of it, wittily turned with a plan of the garden and the portraits of the principal actors in that nocturnal romance. I will tell him that. Tell him further that I hold Montague in my power, that Montague is in the Bastille, that no letters were found upon him. It is true, but that torture may make him tell much of what he knows, and even what he does not know. Exactly. And then add that his Grace has, in the precipitation with which he quit the Isle of Ré, forgotten, and left behind him in his lodging, a certain letter from Madame de Chevreuse, which singularly compromises the Queen, inasmuch as it proves not only that her Majesty can love the enemies of the King, but that she can conspire with the enemies of France. You recollect perfectly all I have told you, do you not? Your Eminence will judge. The ball of Madame the Constable, the night at the Louvre, the evening at Amiens, the arrest of Montague, the letter of Madame de Chevreuse. That's it, said the Cardinal. That's it. You have an excellent memory, milady. But, resumed she, to whom the Cardinal addressed this flattering compliment, if, in spite of all these reasons, the Duke does not give way and continues to menace France? The Duke is in love to madness, or rather to folly, replied Richelieu with great bitterness. Like the ancient paladins, he has only undertaken this war to obtain a look from his lady love. If he becomes certain that this war will cost the honor, and perhaps the liberty, of the lady of his thoughts, as he says, I will answer for it, he will look twice. And yet, said Milady with a persistence that proved she wished to see clearly to the end of the mission with which she was about to be charged, if he persists, said the Cardinal, that is not probable. It is possible, said Milady. If he persists, His Eminence made a pause and resumed. If he persists, well, then I shall hope for one of those events which change the destinies of states. If your Eminence would quote to me some one of these events in history, said Milady, perhaps I should partake of your confidence as to the future? Well, here, for example, said Richelieu, when, in 1610, for a cause similar to that which moves the Duke, King Henry IV, of glorious memory, was about, at the same time, to invade Flanders and Italy, in order to attack Austria on both sides. Well, did there not happen an event which saved Austria? Why should not the King of France have the same chance as the Emperor? Your Eminence means, I presume, the knife stab in the Rue de la Ferronnière? Precisely, said the Cardinal. Does not your Eminence fear that the punishment inflicted upon Ravaillac may deter anyone who might entertain the idea of imitating him? There will be in all times and in all countries, particularly if religious divisions exist in those countries, fanatics who ask nothing better than to become martyrs. Aye, and observe, it just comes to me that the Puritans are furious against Buckingham, and their preachers designate him as the Antichrist. Well, said Milady, well, continued the Cardinal, in an indifferent tone, the only thing to be sought for at this moment is some woman, handsome, young, and clever, who has cause of quarrel with the Duke. The Duke has had many affairs of gallantry, and if he has fostered his amours by promises of eternal constancy, he must likewise have sown the seeds of hatred by his eternal infidelities. No doubt, said Milady coolly, such a woman may be found. Well, such a woman, who would place the knife of Jacques Clement or of Ravaillac in the hands of a fanatic, would save France. Yes, but she would then be the accomplice of an assassination. Were the accomplices of Ravaillac or of Jacques Clement ever known? No, or perhaps they were too high-placed for anyone to dare look for them where they were. The Palace of Justice would not be burned down for everybody, Monseigneur. You think, then, that the fire at the Palace of Justice was not caused by chance? Asked Richelieu, in the tone with which he would have put a question of no importance. I, Monseigneur? Replied Milady. I think nothing. I quote a fact, that is all. Only, I say that if I were named Madame de Montpensier, or the Queen Marie de Medici, I should use less precautions than I take, being simply called Milady Cleric. That is just, said Richelieu. What do you require, then? I require an order which would ratify beforehand all that I should think proper to do for the greatest good of France. But in the first place, this woman I have described must be found, who is desirous of avenging herself upon the Duke. She is found, said Milady. Then the miserable fanatic must be found, who will serve as an instrument of God's justice. He will be found. Well, said the Cardinal, then it will be time to claim the order which you just now required. Your Eminence is right, replied Milady, and I have been wrong in seeing in the mission with which you honor me anything but that which it really is, that is, to announce to his Grace, on the part of your Eminence, that you are acquainted with the different disguises by means of which he succeeded in approaching the Queen during the fete given by Madame the Constable, that you have proofs of the interview granted at the Louvre by the Queen to a certain Italian astrologer, who has no other than the Duke of Buckingham. that you have ordered a little romance of a satirical nature to be written upon the natures of Amiens, with a plan of the gardens in which those adventures took place, and portraits of the actors who figured in them, that Montague is in the Bastille, and that the torture may make him say things he remembers, and even things he has forgotten, that you possess a certain letter from Madame de Chevreuse found in his Grace's lodging, which singularly compromises not only her who wrote it, but her in whose name it was written. Then, if he persists, notwithstanding all this, as that is, as I have said, the limit of my mission, I shall have nothing to do but to pray God to work a miracle for the salvation of France. That is it not, Monseigneur? And I shall have nothing else to do? That is it, replied the cardinal dryly. And now, said Milady, without appearing to remark the change of the Duke's tone toward her, now that I have received the instructions of your Eminence as concerns your enemies, Monseigneur will permit me to say a few words to him of mine? Have you enemies, then? Asked Richelieu. Yes, Monsieur, enemies against whom you owe me all your support, for I made them by serving your Eminence. Who are they? Replied the Duke. In the first place, there is a little intrigante named Bonacieux. She is in the prison of Nantes. That is to say, she was there, replied Milady, but the Queen has obtained an order from the King, by means of which she has been conveyed to a convent. To a convent? Said the Duke. Yes, to a convent. And to which? I don't know. The secret has been well kept. But I will know. And your Eminence will tell me in what convent that woman is? I can see nothing inconvenient in that, said the cardinal. Well, now, I have an enemy much more to be dreaded by me than this little Madame Bonacieux. Who is that? Her lover. What is his name? Oh, your Eminence knows him well, cried Milady, carried away by her anger. He is the evil genius of both of us. It is he who, in an encounter with your Eminence's guards, decided the victory in favor of the King's Musketeers. It is he who gave 3 desperate wounds to De Ward, your emissary, and who caused the affair of the diamond studs to fail. It is he who, knowing it was I who had Madame Bonacieux carried off, has sworn my death. Ah, said the cardinal, I know of whom you speak. I mean that miserable D'Artagnan. He is a bold fellow, said the cardinal, and it is exactly because he is a bold fellow that he is the more to be feared. I must have, said the Duke, a proof of his connection with Buckingham. A proof? Cried Milady. I will have 10. Well then, it becomes the simplest thing in the world. Get me that proof, and I will send him to the Bastille. So far good, Monseigneur. But afterwards? When once in the Bastille, there is no afterward, said the cardinal in a low voice. Ah, pardieu, continued he, if it were as easy for me to get rid of my enemy as it is easy to get rid of yours, as if it were against such people you require impunity. Monseigneur, replied Milady, a fair exchange, life for life, man for man. Give me one, I will give you the other. I don't know what you mean, nor do I even desire to know what you mean, replied the cardinal, but I wish to please you, and see nothing out of the way in giving you what you demand with respect to so infamous a creature. The more so you tell me this D'Artagnan is a libertine, a duellist, and a traitor. An infamous scoundrel, Monseigneur, a scoundrel! Get me paper, a quill, and some ink, then, said the cardinal. Here they are, Monseigneur. There was a moment of silence, which proved that the cardinal was employed in seeking the terms in which he should write the note, or else in writing it. Athos, who had not lost a word of the conversation, took his 2 companions by the hand and led them to the other end of the room. Said Porthos, what do you want? And why do you not let us listen to the end of the conversation? Hush, said Athos, speaking in a low voice. We have heard it all it was necessary we should hear. Besides, I don't prevent you from listening, but I must be gone. You must be gone, said Porthos, and if the cardinal asks for you, what answer can we make? You will not wait till he asks. You will speak first, and tell him that I am gone on the lookout, because certain expressions of our host have given me reason to think the road is not safe. I will say 2 words about it to the cardinal's esquire likewise. The rest concerns myself. Don't be uneasy about that. Be prudent, Athos, replied Aramis. Be easy on that head, replied Athos. You know I am cool enough. Porthos and Aramis resumed their places by the stovepipe. As to Athos, he went out without any mystery, took his horse, which was tied with those of his friends, to the fastenings of the shutters. In 4 words, convinced the attendant of the necessity of a vanguard for their return, carefully examined the priming of his pistols, drew his sword, and took, like a forlorn hope, the road to the camp. And that brings us to the end of chapter 44. Well, the cardinal was definitely plotting and scheming and coming about trying to angle for advantage, as should be expected of one such as he. But we called it when we thought it was Milady up top. Although I did expect it was the man of Mung, not just his esquire or someone there. Although actually I don't think we actually saw the cavalier. So he may be still about. We'll see. But yeah, this is quite a high-level scheme coming out. There's the attempt to put an end to the Duke of Buckingham, and in a bit of quid pro quo, putting an end to D'Artagnan. So, we have a little more to look forward to there. Alright, we've got about 20 minutes. We've got plenty of time to get through another chapter tonight. Depending on how long these are, we might get a second, but I think we might be stuck with just one. We'll see. So, let's continue now with chapter 45. A conjugal scene. Oh my. As Athos had foreseen, it was not long before the cardinal came down. He opened the door of the room in which the musketeers were, and found Porthos playing an earnest game of dice with Aramis. He cast a rapid glance around the room, and perceived that one of his men was missing. "What has become of Monseigneur Athos?" said he. Monseigneur, replied Porthos. "He is gone as a scout, on account of some words of our host, which made him believe the road was not safe." "And you, what have you done, Monsieur Porthos?" "I have won 5 pistoles of Aramis." "Well, now, will you return with me?" "We are at your Eminence's orders." "To horse, then, gentlemen, for it is getting late." The attendant was at the door, holding the cardinal's horse by the bridle. At a short distance, a group of 2 men and 3 horses appeared in the shade. These were the 2 men who were to conduct Milady to Fort La Pointe, and superintended her embarkation. The attendant confirmed to the cardinal that the 2 musketeers had already said, with respect to Athos. The cardinal made an approving gesture, and retraced his route with the same precautions he had used in coming. "Let us leave him to follow the road to the camp, protected by his esquire and the 2 musketeers, and return to Athos." For 100 paces he maintained the speed at which he started, but when out of sight, he turned his horse to the right and made a circuit, and came back within 20 paces of a high hedge to watch the passage of the little troop. Having recognized the laced hats of his companions and the golden fringe of the cardinal's cloak, he waited till the horsemen had turned the angle of the road, and having lost sight of them, he returned at a gallop to the inn, which was opened to him without hesitation. The host recognized him. "My officer," said Athos, "has forgotten to give a piece of very important information to the lady, and has sent me back to repair his forgetfulness." "Go up," said the host. "She is still in her chamber." Athos availed himself of the permission, ascended the stairs with his lightest step, gained the landing, and through the open door perceived Milady putting on her hat. He entered the chamber, and closed the door behind him. At the noise he made in pushing the bolt, Milady turned round. Athos was standing before the door, enveloped in his cloak, with his hat pulled down over his eyes. On seeing this figure, mute and immovable as a statue, Milady was frightened. "Who are you? And what do you want?" cried she. Murmured Athos. "It is certainly she." And letting fall his cloak and raising his hat, he advanced toward Milady. "Do you know me, madame?" said he. Milady made one step forward, and then drew back, as if she had seen a serpent. "So far, well," said Athos. "I perceive you know me." "The Comte de la Fère," murmured Milady, becoming exceedingly pale, and drawing back till the wall prevented her from going any farther. "Yes, Milady," replied Athos, "the Comte de la Fère in person, who comes expressly from the other world to have the pleasure of paying you a visit. Sit down, madame, and let us talk, as the cardinal said." Milady, under the influence of inexpressible terror, sat down without uttering a word. "You certainly are a demon sent upon the earth," said Athos. "Your power is great, I know, but you also know that, with the help of God, men have often conquered the most terrible demons. You have once before thrown yourself in my path. I thought I had crushed you, madame. But either I was deceived, or hell has resuscitated you." Milady, at these words, which recalled frightful remembrances, hung down her head with a suppressed groan. "Yes, hell has resuscitated you," continued Athos. "Hell has made you rich. Hell has given you another name. Hell has almost made you another face. But it has neither effaced the stains from your soul, nor the brand from your body." Milady arose, as if moved by a powerful spring, and her eyes flashed lightning. Athos remained sitting. "You believed me to be dead, did you not, as I believed you to be? And the name of Athos as well concealed the Comte de la Fère as the name Milady Clark concealed Anne de Breuil. Was it not so you were called when your honored brother married us? Our position is truly a strange one," continued Athos, laughing. "We have only lived up to the present time because we believed each other dead, and because a remembrance is less oppressive than a living creature, though remembrance is sometimes devouring." "But," said Milady in a hollow, faint voice, "what brings you back to me? And what do you want with me?" "I wish to tell you that though remaining invisible to your eyes, I have not lost sight of you." "You know what I have done?" "I can relate to you, day by day, your actions from your entrance to the service of the cardinal to this evening." A smile of incredulity passed over the pale lips of Milady. "Listen, it was you who cut off the 2 diamond studs from the shoulder of the Duke of Buckingham. It was you who had Madame Bonacieux carried off. It was you who, in love with De Wardes and thinking to pass the night with him, opened the door to Monsieur d'Artagnan. It was you, believing that De Ward had deceived you, wished to have him killed by his rival. It was you who, when this rival had discovered your infamous secret, wished to have him killed in his turn by 2 assassins, whom you sent in pursuit of him. It was you who, finding the balls had missed their mark, sent poisoned wine with a forged letter to make your victim believe that the wine came from his friends. In short, it was you who have but now in this chamber, seated in this chair I now fill, made an engagement with Cardinal Richelieu to cause the Duke of Buckingham to be assassinated, in exchange for the promise he has made you to allow you to assassinate D'Artagnan. Milady was livid. "You must be Satan!" cried she. "Perhaps," said Athos, "but at all events, listen well to this. Assassinate the Duke of Buckingham, or cause him to be assassinated, I care very little about that. I don't know him. Besides, he is an Englishman. But do not touch with the tip of your finger a single hair of D'Artagnan, who is a faithful friend whom I love and defend. For I swear to you by the head of my father, the crime which you shall have endeavored to commit, or shall have committed, shall be the last." "Monsieur d'Artagnan has cruelly insulted me," said Milady, in a hollow tone. "Monsieur d'Artagnan shall die." "Indeed. Is it possible to insult you, madame?" said Athos, laughing. "He has insulted you, and he shall die." "He shall die," replied Milady. "She first, and he afterward." Athos was seized with a kind of vertigo. The sight of this creature, who had nothing of the woman about her, recalled awful remembrances. He thought how, one day, in a less dangerous situation than the one in which he was now placed, he had already endeavored to sacrifice her to his honor. His desire for blood returned, burning his brain and pervading his frame like a raging fever. He arose in his turn, reached his hand to his belt, drew forth a pistol, and cocked it. Milady, pale as a corpse, endeavored to cry out, but her swollen tongue could utter no more than a hoarse sound, which had nothing human in it, and resembled the rattle of a wild beast. Motionless against the dark tapestry, with her hair in disorder, she appeared like a horrid image of terror. Athos slowly raised his pistol, stretched out his arm so that the weapon almost touched Milady's forehead, and then, in a voice the more terrible, having the supreme calmness of a fixed resolution, "Madame," said he, "you will this instant deliver to me the paper the cardinal signed, or upon my soul I will blow your brains out." With another man, Milady might have preserved some doubt, but she knew Athos. Nevertheless, she remained motionless. "You have 1 second to decide," said he. Milady saw by the contraction of his countenance that the trigger was about to be pulled. She reached her hand quickly to her bosom, drew out a paper, and held it toward Athos. "Take it," said she, "and be accursed." Athos took the paper, returned the pistol to his belt, approached the lamp to be assured that it was the paper, unfolded it, and read, "December 3rd, 1627. It is by my order, and for the good of the state, that the bearer of this has done what he has done. Richelieu." "And now," said Athos, resuming his cloak and putting on his hat, "now that I have drawn your teeth, a viper, bite if you can." And he left the chamber, without once looking behind him. At the door, he found the 2 men, and the spare horse which they held. "Gentlemen," said he, "Monseigneur's order is, you know, to conduct that woman without losing time to Fort La Pointe, and never leave her till she is on board." As these words agreed wholly with the order they had received, they bowed their heads in a sign of assent. With regard to Athos, he leaped lightly into the saddle and set out at full gallop. Only, instead of following the road, he went across the fields, urging his horse to the utmost and stopping occasionally to listen. In one of those halts, he heard the steps of several horses on the road. He had no doubt it was the cardinal and his escort. He immediately made a new point in advance, rubbed his horse down with some heath and leaves of trees, and placed himself across the road, about 200 paces from the camp. "Who goes there?" cried he, as soon as he perceived the horseman. "That is our brave musketeer, I think," said the cardinal. "Yes, Monseigneur," said Porthos, "it is he." "Monsieur Athos," said Richelieu, "receive my thanks for the good guard you have kept. Gentlemen, we are arrived. Take the gate on the left. The watchword is King and Ré." Saying these words, the cardinal saluted the three friends with an inclination of his head, and took the right hand, followed by his attendant, for that night he himself slept in the camp. "Well," said Porthos and Aramis together, as soon as the cardinal was out of hearing. "Well, he signed the paper she required." "I know it," said Athos, coolly, "since here it is." The three friends did not exchange another word till they reached their quarters, except to give the watchword to the sentinels. Only they sent Mousqueton to tell Planchet that his master was requested, the instant that he left the trenches, to come to the quarters of the Musketeers. Milady, as Athos had foreseen, on finding the two men that awaited her, made no difficulty in following them. She had had, for an instant, an inclination to be reconducted to the cardinal, and relate everything to him, but a revelation on her part would bring about a revelation on the part of Athos. She might say that Athos had hanged her, but then Athos would tell that she was branded. She thought it was best to preserve silence, to discreetly set off to accomplish her difficult mission with her usual skill. And then, all things being accomplished to the satisfaction of the cardinal, to come to him and claim her vengeance. In consequence, after having traveled all night, at 7 o'clock she was at the fort of the Point. At 8 o'clock she had embarked, and at 9 the vessel, which, with letters of marque from the cardinal, was supposed to be sailing for Bayonne, raised anchor and steered its course toward England. And that brings us to the end of chapter 35. Found the reunion of Athos and his wife, after all these years and after both of them having thought the other dead. And that was certainly no love lost there. All right. Yeah, that was pretty cold. And he would have pulled the trigger too. You'd have to believe it. There's no way that he would have held back. It was a very, very near thing. Which, I'm not sure that I really blame him on that count. But, yikes. Woo. It is nice to see the Musketeers get some good moments out of them. That was altogether a highlight of Athos there, between finding the stovepipe and realizing that he could listen in on the cardinal, and identifying Milady, and then having the forethought to get himself excused out, thinking or convincing everyone that he's doing the cardinal a favor, a good service, and using that to spin it all on his head. Man, oh man, that was a very well done little trick. And then to make it back to the camp just in front of them to complete the ruse. Whew. All right, yeah, they're not always bumbling fools. Sometimes they actually have a little bit of badassery. Athos, you got it tonight. You got it tonight, that's for sure. All right, guys. We are coming up on 10 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and call that a wrap for tonight. A reminder, tomorrow we are doing a special stream. I have not yet actually decided on the book. I'll find something. It's probably pull something from the bookshelf because I'm unlikely to find a convenient ebook, but we'll see how it plays out. But we'll be starting a little bit early. From 6 p.m. tomorrow, we'll be starting Easter time, and we'll be going until I can't anymore. So that'll be our special birthday of Bash event. The birthday is on Sunday, so we'll probably run into that if the voice holds out, shall we say. So that's something to look forward to tomorrow. I'm right now leaning toward either. We might pull out either just good old Fellowship of the Ring, start with some Tolkien, or we might pull out Andromeda Strain. Crichton is a lot of fun. So we'll see. The latter might be a little bit of a better format just by virtue of Crichton's works are generally a lot more in the first person and narrative style, so they can be a lot more coherent for a narration like this, but we'll see. But yeah, so that'll be our adventure for tomorrow. As I said, we'll be starting 2 hours before our normal time. I will post it over on Bluesky and have a waiting room put up. Yeah, that's one of my favorites. I might stick to Andromeda Strain because it's such a good book, and COVID is just enough in the backlight or in the rear view that it's fine. Right? It's fine. So I think that might be the way I go. Assuming I can find my copy. We'll see. We'll see. But yeah, so that'll be our fun adventure for tomorrow, and we'll have some fun with it. I'll probably lose my voice. So we'll see. Sunday may or may not happen for our regular schedule. It will depend entirely on whether or not I am alive. So, all right, guys, let's go ahead and call this for tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. If you have not yet, I encourage you to drop a like on the stream. And with that little bit of shilling out of the way, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, because we're going to have some fun. All right, good night, everyone, and thank you again.